My son laughed and said, "You'll die with nothing," but the judge had other plans. I never thought my own son would destroy me. That night, sitting in my living room with Jason and his wife Amber, I realized I'd been blind for years. The words he spoke cut deeper than any tool I'd ever worked with in my shop. "You'll die with nothing, old man," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "That's the only thing you've earned." I looked at him, the boy I'd raised, the son I'd sacrificed everything for, and felt something inside break like old glass. My late wife Margaret would have wept. I stared at him for a long moment, and then I whispered words I didn't fully understand yet. "We'll see about that." Jason laughed and walked toward the door. As he left, I quietly pulled open my desk drawer and withdrew a manila file, worn and yellowed with age. My hands trembled. That file contained possibilities he could never imagine. I'd been a fool once, but I wouldn't be one twice. The fight had started over something simple. Jason wanted me to stay quiet about the business. I needed to understand what really happened when he took over Carter's auto repair 2 years ago. I'd walked him through every detail before I retired. Every single detail. But as I pieced it together that night, I realized he'd manipulated me from the beginning. He convinced me to sign papers, promising to modernize the shop, to make it bigger and better. I trusted him with my life's work. Now, sitting alone with old documents spread across my table, my eyes landed on something that made my stomach turn. One signature didn't match mine. My hand shook as I held the papers up to the light. The forgery was sloppy, almost insulting in its carelessness. "He forged my name," I whispered into the empty house. But this discovery was just the beginning. There were other documents, other lies buried in the pile. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to uncover a conspiracy that went far deeper than a simple business theft. The question wasn't how deep the deceit ran, it was whether I had the courage to fight back. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like and subscribe to get notified of our new series. Your support means everything. The letter came on a Tuesday morning, sealed in an official envelope from a real estate company. My hands were steady as I opened it, but my heart wasn't. Jason was selling the house. The house I'd built with my own 2 hands while my late wife Margaret watched and encouraged me. The house where we'd raised our children. Where we'd laughed and cried and lived a full life together. I stumbled to the kitchen table and reread the letter 3 times. The family home was in both our names originally, but after Margaret passed, Jason had cleverly added his name to the deed, claiming it was safer that way. I'd been too grief-stricken to argue. Now he was cashing out, planning to keep all the proceeds. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, the last bedroom where Margaret had breathed, and began packing her belongings carefully. Each item was a memory. Her favorite sweater. Her reading glasses. Her garden hat. Tears fell silently down my weathered face as I placed everything into boxes. I looked around the empty room one last time and whispered, "I'm sorry, Margaret. I should have seen this coming." Within days, I was gone from the only home I'd ever truly known. The man who'd built it was now just a visitor in his own past. The motel room on Highway 41 smelled like old cigarettes and broken promises. The carpet was stained, the air conditioning rattled like dying metal, and the walls were so thin I could hear everything happening next door. I paid for a week in advance with what little cash I had left. This wasn't how I imagined spending my retirement years. I was supposed to be sitting on my porch with a cold drink, watching the sunset, maybe teaching my grandchildren how to fix cars. Instead, I was lying on a lumpy bed, staring at water stains on the ceiling, feeling every one of my 68 years. The pain in my chest was different from anything physical. This was the pain of betrayal, of wasted trust, of a future stolen by the person you loved most. But as the night deepened, something shifted inside me. The pain began to harden into something else, not anger, but resolve. I sat up on the edge of the bed and made myself a promise. You took everything I built, I said to the empty room. The business, the house, my dignity. But I'm not finished yet. I pulled out my old address book and started making a list of people I could trust. The first name was Marion Lewis, a retired attorney. If anyone could help me, it would be her. In a dusty box of papers, I found something that made my entire body go cold. My old business ledger. The one I'd kept by hand for decades, recording every purchase, every payment, every transaction. I'd given it to Jason when he took over, thinking he'd want to understand the business's history. Now, comparing the entries with the shop's official records, I discovered something terrifying. There were payments, significant payments from regular customers, recorded in my ledger that never appeared in the official shop accounts. Customer checks that should have been deposited were missing. Cash transactions that I'd carefully documented weren't reflected anywhere. My hands shook as I circled entry after entry in red ink. That's not just theft, I whispered to myself. That's fraud. He's been skimming money for 2 years. I realized Jason hadn't just taken the business, he'd been systematically stealing from it. The worst part? Some of those customers still trusted the shop, still believed Jason was running it honestly. They had no idea they were being robbed. I carefully photographed every page with an old camera, making copies of everything. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about justice. Marion Lewis's office was small and filled with books, just the way I remembered it from when I'd fixed her car 15 years ago. She'd done me the favor of squeezing me in between other appointments, and I was grateful. I told her everything, the business theft, the forged documents, the house deed, being kicked out, everything. She listened without interrupting, her reading glasses perched on her nose, her pen moving steadily across a notepad. When I finished, there was a long silence. I'm old, I said quietly. I don't have the energy for a fight. She looked up at me then, and I saw something fierce in her eyes. Ed, you have more than a case here. You have evidence. Documentation. Witnesses who know you built that business from nothing. She leaned back in her chair. And if what you're telling me is true, Jason didn't just betray you as a father, he committed multiple felonies. She pulled out a legal pad and began writing notes. You're not fighting alone anymore, Ed. Let's see what we can actually prove. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I'd almost forgotten, hope. Are you as shocked as Edward is right now? Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Marion and I spent hours going through every document related to the house. The deed transfers, the property records, the loan documents. And then she found it, the smoking gun. Look at this, she said, pointing to the signature line on the deed transfer where Jason had added his name. This needs to be notarized, Ed. And according to these records, it never was. I stared at the papers, not fully understanding. Marion explained it slowly, like I was a child. The legal transfer of property required proper notarization. Without it, the transfer wasn't valid. Legally, I still owned the house. Jason had no right to sell it. The implications hit me like a physical blow. My son had stolen my house and sold it illegally. The sale itself was void. I sat back in my chair, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath me. So the new owners, I started, will be required to return the house to you, Marion finished. Jason committed fraud on a massive scale, Ed. And if we play this right, he'll hang himself in court with his own lies. She smiled grimly. People like Jason always dig deeper when they think they're winning. We'll let him dig until he reaches hell. I walked into Carter's Auto Repair on a Tuesday morning. The shop was busy, customers waiting in the lobby, my old employees working hard. They looked up when they saw me, and I saw the sympathy in their eyes. Jason was in the back, laughing with one of the new guys. When he saw me, his expression changed. He strutted forward like he owned the world. "Well, look who showed up," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "A washed-up nobody. Don't show your face here again." The customers went quiet. I could feel their uncomfortable stares. Jason continued, his voice cruel and mocking. "My dad's finished. He's nothing now. Nobody. You understand? He built this place on luck, and now the real owner is making it into something." I said nothing. My silence seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. I simply looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the son I'd raised, but a stranger wearing my son's face. Then I spoke quietly, words that would echo in his mind for months. Even mountains erode eventually. I turned and walked out slowly, my head high. Behind me, I heard him call after me with confusion in his voice. He didn't understand. He thought he'd won. He had no idea that I was already 3 moves ahead, like a chess player watching my opponent rush forward without seeing the trap. Over the next 3 weeks, Marion and I became detectives in our own lives. We subpoenaed records from the auto shop. We reviewed tax filings, or rather, the ones that were suspiciously missing. We interviewed the employees Jason had fired unfairly. We gathered statements from customers who knew the business's history. The picture that emerged was damning. Jason had falsified employee records to hide the fact that he'd laid people off without proper documentation. He'd failed to file business taxes for 2 consecutive years. The unreported income was staggering, over $200,000 in cash that had simply disappeared into his personal accounts. We found bank deposits that didn't match his official reports. We discovered that he'd taken personal loans against the business without my knowledge or consent. Each document, each receipt, each email was another nail in his coffin. Marion organized everything meticulously, building a case so strong that even Jason's best lawyer would struggle. "We're not going to argue in court," she explained. "We're going to let the numbers speak for themselves. Paper doesn't lie, Ed. It never does." I watched the evidence pile up like a weight Jason couldn't escape. I found out through an old customer that Jason was expanding. He'd bought a new truck for the business, my business, using money that likely came from his theft. He was bragging to anyone who'd listen about how successful he'd become without his old man holding him back. He'd bought Amber new jewelry and taken her on an expensive vacation. He was living large, celebrating his victory, completely unaware that I was quietly gathering every thread of his crimes. He'd posted on social media about his success, about his fresh start, about how he'd finally escaped his father's shadow. I read each post with a strange mixture of sadness and grim determination. This was the man I'd raised. This was what I'd worked 60 years to provide. And now he was dancing on the grave of my life's work. But his arrogance was his weakness. He was sloppy because he thought he was untouchable. He kept poor records because he believed no one would ever question him. He left a trail so obvious that even a child could follow it. And he did it all while I quietly documented everything, building a case that would become unshakable. I walked into First National Bank on a sunny Thursday morning. Mr. Holloway, the bank manager, had known my family for 30 years. He'd given me my first business loan when I was young and hungry. I asked to speak with him privately about an old loan. We sat in his office, and I asked him directly, the business loan that Jason mentioned paying off last year, what was the status on that? Mr. Holloway's expression shifted. He typed something into his computer and frowned. "Mr. Carter, there was no payoff. You're still the guarantor on that loan. Your name is on every document." My heart stopped. This was better than I'd hoped. If I was still the legal guarantor, that meant the bank still considered me responsible for the business. More importantly, it meant I still had legal claim to the business itself. "The loan is in my name?" I asked carefully. "Yes, sir. Completely in your name. Your son has been making payments from a business account, but the loan document shows you as the owner and guarantor. He can't legally change that without your signature, which—" He paused, checking the records. "He never obtained. I left that bank with a piece of paper that changed everything. I was still legally tied to the business. And that meant I could fight for it in court." Marion filed the lawsuit on a Wednesday morning. I wasn't there when she did it. I didn't want to be near anyone when it happened. I wanted to be alone with what I'd set in motion. The lawsuit was comprehensive: fraud, unlawful transfer of property, elder exploitation, forgery of documents, and theft. All of it carefully documented, all of it supported by evidence. Marion had written it in clear language, making it accessible to the judge while still maintaining legal precision. She handed me a copy to read, and I read it 3 times. Seeing my betrayal spelled out in legal terms made it feel both more real and somehow less personal. Jason didn't know yet. I sat in my motel room, waiting for him to receive the summons. I knew it was coming. The process server had been hired. When it arrived, his entire world would shift. And he had no idea. I spent that night thinking about Margaret, about what she would have wanted me to do. I believed she would have wanted justice, but also mercy. I didn't know if I had that kind of strength left inside me. I didn't know if I could forgive him even if he asked. All I knew was that tomorrow, everything changed. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. This is where the story gets intense. The process server caught him at the shop in front of his employees. I heard about it from one of the old mechanics who still worked there, a man named Tony who'd known me for years. They served him with papers right there at the counter, Tony told me over the phone. In front of everyone. His face went white, Ed. Then red. Then white again. Jason received the summons for fraud and elder exploitation. When he read the details, all the documented evidence, all the charges, his arrogance cracked. According to Tony, he'd laughed it off initially, telling people it was ridiculous, that his old man was making everything up. But Amber reacted differently. Tony said she'd looked at the papers and gone completely silent. She knew. Somehow, on some level, she'd known what Jason had done was wrong, and now that it was documented and official, the weight of it had crashed down on her. He can't win, I heard Jason telling people afterward, his voice shaking. My lawyer says it's all circumstantial. But Amber's eyes told a different story. She understood that we had documents, evidence, facts. And facts in court are more powerful than confidence. My daughter Laura came to help me prepare for court. She was furious at Jason for what he'd done to me, but her anger was nothing compared to her determination to see justice served. She sat with me and Marion, describing how Jason had treated me after our mother died. How he'd slowly isolated me, convincing me to give up more and more control. How he deliberately made it seem like I was becoming incompetent, unable to manage the business or the house. He was grooming you, Dad, Laura said, her voice thick with emotion. He was setting this up from the beginning. Hearing my daughter confirm my worst suspicions was almost unbearable. I broke down in tears for the first time since this had all started. Laura held my hand, and I whispered, I just wanted him to be better than me. I wanted him to succeed. He is successful, Laura said fiercely. At being a criminal. In the courtroom preparation sessions with Marion, Laura testified about specific incidents, specific lies, specific moments when Jason had manipulated our family. Each statement was recorded, each detail documented. My daughter became my voice when my voice was too shattered to speak. The courtroom was full. Word had spread through our small town about Edward Carter versus his own son. People came to watch, customers, neighbors, friends, and people who were simply curious about family tragedy. I walked in quietly, wearing my best suit, the one Margaret had bought me years ago. My head was high, my shoulders back. Jason strutted in like he was invincible, his expensive lawyer beside him, his confidence still intact. We sat on opposite sides of the room like enemies in a war. The judge, an older woman named Judge Patterson, reviewed my documents carefully, her expression growing darker as she read. When she looked up, her eyes found mine, and I saw understanding there. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice echoing through the courtroom, "these signatures on the deed transfer documents. They don't match the signature on your earlier business records." The courtroom went quiet. Jason's lawyer leaned over to whisper something urgent to his client. I watched Jason's face carefully. The confidence was draining away, replaced by something that looked like fear. The judge continued, "We'll need a handwriting expert to verify this. We'll recess to gather more evidence." A handwriting expert testified 3 days later. She was professional and precise, comparing Jason's known signatures with the signatures on the forged documents. She placed them on a large screen for everyone to see. The differences were obvious. The forged signature was sloppier, inconsistent, clearly done by someone trying to imitate my handwriting but not quite succeeding. In my professional opinion, the expert concluded, the signatures on the deed transfer documents were not made by Mr. Edward Carter. They were forged by someone else. Gasps filled the courtroom. Amber put her head in her hands. Jason's lawyer immediately stood up, trying to argue that the documents could be genuine, that the expert might be mistaken. But the evidence was undeniable. The signatures simply didn't match. The judge looked at Jason with an expression that mixed disappointment and disgust. "Forgery is a serious crime, Mr. Jason Carter. Do you have anything to say?" Jason tried to maintain his composure, but his voice shook. My father must have signed different documents. This is a misunderstanding." But nobody believed him. The mask had slipped, and everyone in that courtroom had seen the truth underneath. As the days passed and more evidence was presented, Jason's empire began to crumble. Amber started selling her jewelry to pay for legal fees. Customers who'd heard about the fraud filed their own complaints against the shop. Several employees quit, unwilling to work for someone they now knew was a criminal. The business that Jason had been so proud of, that he'd stolen from me with such confidence, was falling apart in front of his eyes. He made the mistake of trying to call me one evening, begging me to drop the charges. "Dad, please," he said into the phone, his voice desperate. "We can work this out. I'm sorry. I made mistakes. Please don't do this." I listened without saying anything. Finally, he broke down into tears. "Dad? Please say something. I thought about Margaret. I thought about the years of work I'd poured into the business. I thought about the home we'd built together and how he tried to sell it out from under me." Then I hung up the phone. The man begging me for mercy was also the man who'd laughed and said I'd die with nothing. He didn't deserve my compassion. Not yet. Marion discovered something extraordinary while reviewing old documents. Margaret, my late wife, had been far more clever than I'd realized. Years before she passed away, she'd set up a trust in my name. A financial trust that had been quietly growing, accumulating interest, investments, and dividends. It was something she'd done without telling me, as a gift, a safety net for my retirement. When I learned about it, I broke down completely. Even in death, Margaret was protecting me. Even after all these years, she was looking out for me. The trust wasn't enormous, but it was enough. Enough to live on. Enough to fight. Enough to survive whatever came next. Marion explained that Jason had never known about this trust. He'd assumed I was penniless, that I had nothing left. But Margaret had made sure I'd never be truly helpless. She'd prepared for something like this long before any of us could have imagined it happening. I visited her grave the day I learned about the trust. I sat there for hours, my hand on the headstone, whispering thank you over and over again. "You always knew," I said to the stone. "You always believed in me. Even when I'd stopped believing in myself." The day I testified, the courtroom was packed. I walked to the witness stand and placed my hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth. Then I told my story. I spoke about how I'd built the business from nothing, about the years of hard work, about teaching Jason everything I knew. I described how he'd manipulated me into signing over control, how he'd made promises he never kept. I recounted the day he kicked me out of the house I'd built, the day he laughed and said I'd die with nothing. My voice remained steady, dignified, calm. I didn't get angry. I didn't cry. I simply spoke the truth. He took my name off the door, I said toward the end of my testimony. He took the business I'd spent my entire life building. He took the house my late wife and I had built together. But there's one thing he could never take from me, my integrity. That's mine, and it always will be. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the judge looked moved. When I stepped down, several people in the audience had tears in their eyes. I'd won something important, regardless of what the judge decided. I'd reclaimed my dignity. Judge Patterson began her ruling by acknowledging the evidence. She addressed the forged documents, the fraudulent business dealings, the elder exploitation. Then she made a statement that changed everything. The deed transfer to Mr. Jason Carter was never legally valid due to improper notarization, she said. Therefore, Mr. Edward Carter remains the legal owner of the property in question. Additionally, according to the bank records and business loan documents, Mr. Edward Carter remains the legal owner and guarantor of the business. Mr. Jason Carter's claim of ownership is null and void. Jason's jaw dropped. His lawyer immediately began trying to argue, but Judge Patterson continued. Furthermore, she said, her voice becoming harder, the evidence of forgery and fraud is overwhelming. We'll be addressing the criminal implications in a separate hearing. Mr. Carter will face charges for felony fraud, forgery, and elder exploitation. She banged her gavel once. It was over. I had won. I was still the legal owner of my business and my home. The bailiff led Jason out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Amber screamed after him, calling his name, begging him to tell her it would be okay. But nothing would be okay. Everything was falling apart. I watched him being taken away, and I felt something I didn't expect, pity. This was still my son, even after everything he'd done. Even after all the betrayal and theft and cruelty, he was still the boy I'd raised. My eyes glistened with tears, but they weren't tears of joy or satisfaction. They were tears of loss. I'd won the case, but I'd lost my son long before we ever set foot in that courtroom. Marion put her hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently. You did it, Ed, she said. You got justice. But standing there, watching them take Jason away, I realized that justice and victory weren't the same thing. Justice was necessary. But it didn't make the pain go away. Subscribe right now if you want to see what happens next. Edward's story isn't over yet. I returned to Carter's Auto Repair as its legal owner. My old employees welcomed me back like I was a soldier returning from war. We held a small gathering in the shop, and I rehired every person Jason had fired unfairly. I brought back Tony, Miguel, and 3 others who'd been loyal to me for years. Together, we cleaned the shop, fixed what Jason had neglected, and began rebuilding. One day, I hung a new sign above the counter. It read, Carter and Son, a legacy of integrity. But then I paused. I thought about what that sign really meant. I thought about Jason and everything he'd done. And I removed the "and Son" part. The sign now read simply, Carter's Auto Repair, a legacy of integrity. It hurt to make that change. It hurt to accept that my son wasn't part of this legacy anymore. But it was honest, and honesty was all I had left to offer. 6 months later, Jason showed up at the shop on a Tuesday morning. He was on parole, required to report regularly to his probation officer. He looked broken, thinner, grayer, older than his years. I was working under a car when I heard the bell above the door chime. I slid out from under the vehicle and looked up. "Dad," he said quietly. His voice was different, no arrogance, no cruelty. Just broken humanity. I lost everything. I sat up and looked at my son for a long moment. I thought about all the years I'd worked to build something for him, all the sacrifices Margaret and I had made. I thought about the day he'd laughed and said I'd die with nothing. "I lost you long before this, Jason," I said quietly. His face crumpled, and he broke down into tears right there in my shop. He fell to his knees and wept like a child. I watched him cry, and something inside me shifted. This wasn't triumph. This was tragedy. This was the complete collapse of everything we might have been. Despite everything, despite the theft, the betrayal, the cruelty, I made Jason an offer. "I'll give you a job," I said. "You'll work as a mechanic. No ownership. No special treatment. Just a job, just like anyone else would get. You'll earn minimum wage, and you'll work hard to prove yourself." Jason looked up at me in shock. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you do that after everything I did?" I thought about how to answer. "Because you're still my son," I said. "And maybe, just maybe, you can still learn from your mistakes." Jason started the next day. He swept floors, he organized tools, he did the work nobody else wanted to do. And slowly, over weeks and months, I taught him the real value of integrity. I explained how a business wasn't built on shortcuts and lies, but on trust and honest work. Whether he'd ever truly change, I didn't know. But I decided to give him the chance. "You'll earn your name back one day," I told him. "But only if you decide it's worth earning." The final letter from Judge Patterson arrived 6 months after the sentencing. The case was officially closed. All property had been restored to my name. The business was mine again, completely and legally. And Judge Patterson had included a personal note. She'd requested that Jason's fraud record be sealed under the express wishes of Edward Carter, the victim in this case. She wrote, "Mr. Carter has chosen mercy over continued punishment." That speaks to his character. I held that letter for a long time, reading it over and over. Then I looked out the window of my shop. Jason was working on a customer's engine, his face concentrated, his hands moving with growing skill. He'd never be the son I'd hoped he'd be. But maybe, just maybe, he could become someone honest. Someone real. Someone better than he'd been. I smiled softly, thinking about Margaret, thinking about all the years of work, thinking about the day Jason had laughed and said I'd die with nothing.